By enmeshing himself in space-time, the elephant god has become real, as witness his light color. Unfortunately for him, the food on the table has become imaginary, as witness the square galactic barriers on the same nucleons. The author's association of square equals imaginary is not firm. Possible support exists in the square-looking pieces, food, being held by someone in plate, this one in the lower right. Also note that the 4 light and 4 dark particles evolving from space-time fluid at the bottom of this plate also. Compare this plate at the right with the photograph of the original below as appears in Masters of the World. The existence of fairly precise squares are seen between the pieces of corn in the one case but not the other. It is not inconceivable to this author that the Mayans may have hid from the usual view of the imaginary nucleus. If so, the square equals imaginary association is firm. That this may only be a photographic effect is not denied. The use of a dark background to signify the imaginary world is considered fairly certain. The library color plates must be viewed for the reader to share the convention, however. But what of the details of the imaginary world? We see it here in this plate, in the bottom. The man on the lower left is meditating. He is sending his self-awareness mechanism aloft in the mind of a bird which is shown attached. Note the strange objects that are being perceived. The man on the lower right is using drugs to escape into the imaginary world, as symbolized by the hallucinatory weed attached to his third eye. It is important to note that he does not have a good control over his awareness as the meditator, for his self-awareness mechanism is shown reversed. When the Spaniards arrived, they found a culture strongly oriented around drugs. The natives considered what they were experienced while under the influence of these drugs to be quite real. If the knowledge displayed in these manuscripts was gained thereby, one can perhaps excuse their enthusiasm. Examine the top of this other plate. On the right is shown another sower of nucleons. He is dreaming as indicated by the wings and cloud coming from the top of his head. Note the detached floating brain in the upper center. Notice that the self-awareness mechanism is removed from his head and now acts as a unit by itself, and it sits in the pot at the center of the picture. Its control over events is not smooth, however, and this is symbolized by the 2 segmented portions of the snake of awareness underneath the pot. Note the fall of the 2 men towards the infinity side on the left. In this plate on the bottom, we see the Quetzalcoatl and the self-aware dog have acquired some control over his dream state. The dream state exists as still indicated by the independent awareness mechanism, but the participants have somehow gained partial control over their dreams, astral travel, as indicated by the reversed mechanisms on their head and by the clear picture of Quetzalcoatl motioning the snake of awareness to come out of its segmented condition. One wonders what he and the dog are discussing. These other 2 plates have been retained even though not well understood by the author. This is because these 4 plates in sequence, which, if the author translation of the first 2 plates is correct, explains the realms of the imaginary world and the various ways to enter them. Recall that nucleons have handles or bonds which pass in and out of existence and which allow for the identity of one nucleon and another. Refer plate here, the 3 atomic bonds are seen differently by the real man and the imaginary god. The 2 that are present disappear, and the 1 that is absent appears. Another series containing the same sort of information exists on this other plate, on the second row from the bottom. If one uses letters to signify basic states and primes to indicate slight alterations of those states, the bird and man figure passes through 4 conditions. This type of series is repeated on another place in terms of a tree, not included in this collection. The author feels that the neutron, proton, neutron, electron four-cycle series is being described. Traditionalists, no doubt, would think of the four seasons. A picture from the Machiavellian Codex Aztec is shown below because of its possible meanings related to the real and imaginary worlds. Here may be represented the total universe. It is composed of two halves separated by a great chiasm. The top is the real world, the bottom is the imaginary. Identically, they may be termed matter and antimatter. Notice that the snake of awareness is dual and travels through both. The fact that the two halves coexist by one existing while the other does not, and vice versa, is indicated by the alternative type of light and dark. It is seen that the bulb exists in the imaginary world even though they give birth plants in the real world. Bulbs exist in the imaginary world even though they give birth to plants in the real world. The two black petals demonstrate that occasionally the strict separation of the worlds does not hold. Just as there is an eye of the mind, third eye, there are ears of the mind. This will be found indicated as a second pair of mind ears, just above the brain. Note that the symbols in the text portions of these plates and these plates up above on the right and this other one and elsewhere, that these mind ears can be means whereby one connects the handles of a galaxy into other galaxies is seen in the case of the dog, like here we see it. The end approaches. Examine this plate when the snake of awareness reaches the point of striking the nose into the vase to see where the energy comes from. The result is a damaged and burned nose, and as seen in the top right, the snake sleeps. All the while that the snake was traveling from the beginning of creation towards the end, the brain was developing its ability to perceive. The turtle is used to illustrate the evolving brain. As we examine this plate in the bottom on the top and this other one upper left, the interior of the turtle is seen to be space-time formed into next little cells, but the cells are identical and form no picture. Also examine the series of pictures on this plate in the bottom for possible illustration of a relationship between the brain, turtle, and self-awareness mechanism. Recall that the gods are waiting for the developed brain to be burned at the time of gravitational collapse or the end of the cycle, so that they may smell the burning flesh and enjoy the filtered nucleons of one size. Examine this plate. At the middle right is seen the tail of the snake as indicated by the man's head and the apple. The death god happily takes over at this point and begins passing the snake clockwise. This snake of awareness is then passed on by an ignorant native, and then next an enlightened native, as indicated by his glowing head. Then appears someone who may represent a god or a civilized man. Note the third eye and again the Babylonian typed hat. The turtle now carries a fully developed brain inside and is being fed into the giant sacrificial urn to be burnt. But the cycle continues as the rain god pulls the snake along. It's seen that the head of the snake it is at the tail. And so the process repeats. Man again imagines the gods into existence and feeds them at the end of the age. It is no doubt significant that the head of the snake of awareness is shown with the beak of a bird. That this is definitely the beak of a bird may be seen by comparison with birds as shown in other plates. The author has presented a translation of some of the Mayan manuscripts, ideogrammic portions, which has the internal consistency and agrees well with the principles of the O hypothesis. The translation offered can only be valid, however, if a code within a code exists. More specifically, it is held that the religious life of the Mayans was built around the common meaning of the first code, and that purposely hidden within this common meaning was a detailed exposition of the nature of the universe, basically in agreement with the views of the author. While the author considers it quite striking that the translation occurred after the hypothesis had been developed, it would not be the first case of seeing what one wanted to see. For example, the standard meaning of the self-awareness mechanism in the upper center of a plate is corn growing out of 3 seeds. If one then takes into account that the Mayas considered corn itself a god, the eye within the corn becomes less startling. On the other hand, this suggests that the traditionalist wants to see advanced beings in space-time machines are considered impossible, and therefore any interpretation in that vein will not be entertained completely regardless of the strength of the evidence. But to dismiss the traditionalist view would be illogical in consideration of the testimony of the present beliefs of the Maya. Thus, proposal code within a code seems the only alternative if the author's translation is valid. It must be emphasized, however, that the first code is not yet broken. No paragraph yet exists with any certainty. Only phrases built up by speculations concerning the glyphs and some of the ideograms, and the phrases themselves are held to vary radically depending on context. Thus, in opposition to what appears to be the tendency of the first code, the proposed second code allows basically only one meaning to each symbol, regardless of context. Further, the only time different symbols are used in the same context is to illustrate some property of equality. Many ancient people held in common a worship of the snake with the bird's head. Keeping in mind the properties of self-awareness, the following quotes from ancient Egyptian and Phoenician sources are at the least curious and serve as a fitting conclusion to this paper. Tacitus, and after him the Phoenicians and Egyptians, defined the species of dragons and serpents as having the strongest breath of all crawling animals. He declares that the serpent belongs to aqueous matter in that it has a speed that nothing can surpass because of the breath without fast hands and any of the external means that other animals have. It performs all movements and exemplifies the most varied shapes, gives whatever speed it wishes to the helices it describes in the motion. This animal does not die a natural death. The Phoenicians call it agathodemon, the good spirit, and the Egyptians called it Nep, giving it the head of a hawk because of the energy of that bird. Philogabelius of the words of Sanku-nation. The first and most eminent divinity is the hawk-headed serpent, which, when it opens its eyes, fills all the first engendered earth with light, and when it closes them, light is succeeded by darkness. Areus of Heraclitus, Egyptian temple scribe. The end.